my lovely friend invited me to the Interview with the Vampire season 2 premiere, and it was so much fun. And I love Interview with the Vampire, the book, obviously, because we're both Anne Rice girlies. That's how we're like, we have many connections, but that's one of our biggest ones.
That's not how we met.
It's not how we met.
It's one of those things that was like kismet. That was like, oh, you, yeah.
I'm just like you. Just
Wait,
like
we've been friends for 10 years, and this.
Yeah. And it's the biggest joke too is that like, so she's totally the vampire girly. Me, I'm the Mayfair witch girly, and look how you won.
The Mayfair show.
Say that for my Patreon. This is yours.
Watch Princess Week's YouTube channel.
We'll discuss that later on. I feel like Interview is such an interesting. Like I read it before, and I read it again in college when I was getting my degree. And it's
what was your degree in?
So when I was in undergraduate, we had like honors programs. I'm in an honors program. I was a nerd, and so we had a vampire course.
Oh my god, I'm so jealous. My school did not have a vampire course.
We had an honors vampire course, and I was like, easy A, and it was. But we read Interview with the Vampire, and I think Anne Rice's prose in that book is so phenomenal. Like, even though I love Lestat, and I definitely feel like I get why she chose him to be her voice for the other books, I think like Louis' perspective was so new when it happened, and it's become so gauche now that I think people don't appreciate it as much. But the
it's like the vampire with too many feelings.
The feelings. But like his like Catholic angst and ennui, the like all those crises were just so deliciously handled. And I think that in adapting it to a new show, I'm always, as someone who's a black person, when I see race bending happen, I'm excited for the actor because I know they're going to get an opportunity, but I'm also just like, how much is race going to really play a part in this adaptation? And I think while there are some issues, I think the show has really tried to really take into account what it is like for Louis as a black man to operate in the world. And I think just through that, it has done so much more than I expected. And I watch it for him. I was like, I love Lestat, but I watch it to see how they're going to tell this black vampire story, because I remember when we talk about female vampire-led stories, there's already so few of those, and then you add race into it, and there's already less of those. So that when you have one where you have Claudia as a black vampire, who's also a woman, and Lou is a black vampire, it's like, what an exciting thing to see, like Anne Rice's series, but more modernity brought into that tale.
So what did you think of episode 1? I had already seen it, so this was my third time seeing it. But this was your first time seeing it.
Yeah.
Like, how did you feel?
Because it's World War II. My boyfriend's really into World War II. Cis men, that's how they are. But I thought it was interesting to see when they had the line about black Ukrainians, I was like, oh, that's so topical, because there was a conversation about black people in Ukraine, and also it's interesting seeing how they have Louis keep his identity as being a black person while navigating Europe during World War II. I thought it was very exciting. I thought that's the way that they show vampires and other cultures is really interesting. There being a difference between American vampirism versus the European version. I thought it was a great entry point back into the show, for sure.
How did you feel like Louis as a vampire, but also as a black man, attacking this war-torn landscape? What did the blackness make a difference in this case versus?
Well, I think the thing about Louis that's interesting, especially played by Jacob, is that he's got many different layers to his ethnicity. He appears black, but he's also mixed race.
Yeah, he's Creole, right?
He's Creole. So in New Orleans, different blackness than it would be in Europe. So he's black, in Europe versus being Creole black in New Orleans, or versus another kind of black. So it's also him trying to navigate that. And I think because they have a new actress playing Claudia, and she has more phenotypal black, a little bit darker skin, she has more phenotypes. And so how she's so aggressive navigating it is interesting choices.
No, she's someone who speaks a language. She's someone who's smart.
She makes more effort to try and figure these things out.
Louis can't figure out the language, so she's just he's just a dumb servant. He can't even talk.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm the one who speaks the language, but I'm 14 years old. So.
Yeah. I feel especially we talk about adultification and Claudia, it's already a layered conversation, but you add race into it, it adds even more to it. But I think Louis himself is still trying to figure out where he fits in because he's so digmatized by Lestat. And I think he misses him. I think he misses...
he misses him real bad. No, that's what we saw in the episode.
Yeah.
We saw him, like...
hallucinating him, literally.
Right, yeah. But the way he hallucinated Lestat was threatening.
Yeah.
This time. Like, we've seen in the trailers him hallucinating Lestat in kind of romantic ways.
Yeah.
But in this episode, we saw him hallucinating Lestat saying, when I catch you, I'm going to kill you.
When I see you, Ricky. I agree. And I think that, I think it's his own guilt. It's his own guilt that wanting to be punished for hurting his lover, wanting to act out in that way.
There was an interview that came out today from, TVGuide.com that was Sam Reed talking about his acting choices, about how, I am not playing Lestat. I am playing Louis the way he perceives Lestat right now, and how he perceives that because he's processing these feelings. And, this is Louis' emotional process, his grieving process, his recovery process from abuse.
Yeah. And I think that's so important because, they do, I talked to you about this before. I think all vampire relationships are inherently toxic. Mm-hmm. And I think especially because, Lestat being Louis' maker, there's only going to be, power dynamics. But there's also love there. So how do you reconcile being in love with your abuser? Also being an abuser yourself, because he can't love anyone else without taking that part of him with him.
Monsters and love with monsters.
Exactly.
But
becoming monsters.
What monster is a worse monster than the other monster? Armand has a speech to Louis in the book, which we'll see if it ends up in the show or not, where Armand is okay, what is sin? What means you are condemned to hell? If a infant commits the sin, does that mean it's condemned to hell? Or are you saying that there's certain levels of sin, you pass a certain level of sin and now you're condemned to hell?
Yeah.
Where does it end, Louis? Where's the line? Who are you to decide the line? And Louis mind blown.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes Louis an interesting protagonist in the book, is because while he's answering those questions, we're also answering them ourselves. Because I think when you're put in the face of I'll be a vampire, you think of it as for the glory. But if you get to sit with our emotions already anyway, imagine sitting with them for hundreds of years.
I mean, maybe then
decades.
I'd finally finish my therapy.
I mean, you're I can afford it now. I'm a vampire. I can afford health insurance. But I think that's what makes it so interesting and so rich, is that Louis is feeling those emotions and feeling them so strongly. And I think I recently went back and I watched the Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise one. Tom Cruise is obviously an amazing Lestat. But I think Brad Pitt's Louis, what it misses is a true feeling of separateness, of distance from the possibility of happiness. And I feel the way Jacob plays Louis, you always feel he feels just up against the glass of joy and keeping himself from having. There's a scene in this premiere where he's talking with Armand, and the lack of intimacy in their bedroom is so interesting compared to how
this is in the modern times in Dubai.
In Dubai,
yeah, the framing network before they go back to the flashback. Yeah,
I kept thinking about how you would see Lestat and Louis in the coffin together. And just the way you knew they had to be close to touch and be intimate.
It's the coffin is an intimate space.
Yeah.
Whereas Armand and Louis have this bed.
Yeah.
That's California King, right?
Exactly. And they're not connected.
No, they are not.
And I think that in a lot of ways, there's this great idea of how much of after you face trauma are you able to connect with another person. I think through Armand and Louis, he's that's the love of my life. But how much can he be when the real love of your life, in my opinion, caused you so much fucking grief?
That's exactly what Daniel says in this episode, isn't it? He's the real love of your life is in a dump. And Louis and
I don't know him.
Right?
Armand's let's cancel this. Let's.
So what did you think of Claudia? So in the previous season, Daniel's looking at Claudia's diaries, and he's there is real evidence that she hated you for a while because you refused to kill Lestat, because you refused to burn it. She fucking hated you.
Sure.
And she gradually sort of got back with you. And so we kind of skipped that gap of her gradual, and now we're back to, in this episode, of seeing her sort of coming back to Louis, but still not quite there yet.
For sure, yeah.
So what do you think about her teenage like stagnant. She's 30-something by now, but she's still functionally a teenager.
Arrested development.
Yeah. So like her relationship to her father/brother, how she's like rationalizing him as a mentor figure, but also a partner figure of, is he an equal to me or is he a leader to me?
Yeah.
And so on.
Well, I think there's a reason why Claudia is probably one of the best characters Anne Rice ever came up with. Through Claudia, you see a woman developing in a child's body, more extreme in the book than it is in the show, obviously. And like asking the question is like, when am I going to be allowed to be an adult? How can I be allowed to be an adult? And I think that while we skip through her anxiety with Lestat, we know it's her anxiety with Louis, we know it's going to come back eventually as book readers. But I think that like because of survival, she needs him. Because she's so young and will always be perceived as young, she needs an older person to be around her. And I think that breeds the resentment even more. Because what must it feel like to be going through aging and developing and becoming, in many ways, more capable, more intelligent, more wily than Louis, but needing him because he's a man, because he's older, and because you will always be seen as a child. I think especially with this newer Claudia, she really portrays the kind of like, I can't fucking stand you, but I love you, and we're in this together. And I think that what I'm looking forward to as the show progresses is showing the way in which that no matter how much they made us cared or what they could have done, Louis and Lestat were always destined to fail Claudia because no one should be a vampire at that age. Vampirism is for grown-ups.
Do you think that the fact, I mean, they aged Claudia up, I feel like that makes it like a little bit better than it was, but now she's black. And that makes it a lot worse than it was.
For sure.
Like, how do you see that balance?
Well, I was talking about how I wanted to talk about Fledgling eventually. And I feel like
Octavia Butler.
Fledgling. And I feel like Claudia in this show is a great conversation with that character because I feel like black girls are adultified. So
they are.
Yeah.
Like, you see, like, a black 10-year-old, like in Fledgling, she's a 10-year-old vampire, and she's, like, a sex object already.
Yeah.
Even though the white character is like, I'm drawn to your vampireness and I can't help it, and that makes me feel like a creepy, like a rapist, I still can't help it. It's like, because it's societally like a thing that it slides.
Yeah. It comes with innocence and stuff doesn't always translate. And I think that's kind of the thing that's interesting about Claudia is that, like, she obviously was innocent, was a child, and then instantly corrupted. And I feel like in the first season more so than we've seen so far, the second one,
we only seen one episode.
We only seen one episode so far. What's interesting about Claudia as a black character in this sense that like her wanting to grow up, her being, and I think also like her desirability as a young black girl is not based on her innocence. It's based on the fact that she is seen as someone who is not innocent.
She's a sexy vampiress.
Exactly.
She's like a sultry seductress of the night now, right?
Going
like,
to school, and I think that is something that's interesting because, like, Claudia in the books is much younger, obviously. She's like
no one
6,
objectifies her as a sex object.
Exactly.
No.
But and I think part of it honestly, they had to cast an older actress, which
obviously,
and that's the ethical thing to do. And it also expands the competition of like, because to still be 13, 14 is still a child in our modern day consciousness. And so like, how should we feel about people who are sexualizing willingly a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old? And what does it mean as a black girl to be seen as that young as being able to be a woman?
I mean, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I can relate. I remember growing up, like we're busty ladies.
We're very busty ladies.
And when I was a busty lady about the time like 11 and 12, and so like I remember taking the train and feeling very like looking womanly, quote unquote.
But you're 11.
But I'm a child.
You're 11.
I can control when puberty hits me, and it's like a thing of like trying to reconcile my own body, how it's betraying me. And I think in a lot of ways, that's Claudia's feeling. Her body is betraying her, but not by aging.
It's like the opposite betrayal.
Exactly.
Yeah. She's like, I wish I had
birth. I wish I could express myself as a woman, but I can't. And for me, it was like my right way to express myself as a woman when I still felt a child mentally. Because I was very, like, my parents were very, like, protective of me. So, like, I was trying to watch Digimon, and men are looking at my breasts and thinking about, like, I want to go home and watch anime. And they're already thinking about how to sexualize me. And with Claudia, I feel like it's going to be interesting to see how she sexualizes herself. Because even in the promo, we always see her in like baby doll dresses and pigtails. And I'm like, how much of it is that as you? And how much is the expectation of you?
But the promos don't show us anything with her with men. They show us her with Madeleine.
Yes.
So when we take Claudia in a queer direction and she's involved with women, does that make a difference?
I don't know yet. I think I'm going to see how it plays out because I feel like Claudia's queerness, which you just brought up, is so interesting because I feel like her relationship to Lestat and Louis would make her distrustful of men. The men in her life have utterly failed her.
But she was also raised by gay dads, so I feel like that would make her more into like the queer realm than like a normal child raised by like.
Can you imagine Lestat getting asked like gay son or thought daughter?
So you've read the books. Yeah. You know about Claudia and Madeleine. Claudia develops this attachment to Madeleine. She wants to make Madeleine a vampire. Madeleine becomes her eternal vampire companion. In her ideal world, there is no men involved in this. There is no power dynamic involved in this. Yeah. So we know from the previews that Madeleine is a white woman. Yeah. And Claudia still has that kind of attachment to her. We've seen that in the trailers. Yeah. How does that feel?
I feel like she's recreating her parental dynamic of Louis and Lestat then.
So Madeleine as a white woman is basically Louis Lestat.
It's her recreating that dynamic with this newer person. Because it's like, it's what she's seeing works, it's what she's seeing being obsessive. And I think it's also just like, to be clear, her having a white person be the face of their vampirism allows them more mobility. Yeah, she'll be able to operate in the world differently.
If you're my companion, then we can like do these things, and you'll be like
the same way how like in the first season when like Lestat was doing that for Louis in New Orleans. You know, like it's the same thing. She's like in vampirism, we were choosing a mortal partner in the modern day area. Choosing a white person is actually probably a really solid thing to do because they can give you a layer of protection as you operate through the world.
We didn't see Madeleine in this episode, but we did see Claudia and Louis navigating war-torn Eastern Europe. And Claudia was the command. She was in charge. She spoke all the languages, which Louis did not quite have the grasp of. She would go to the borders with her papers and present them to the Nazis and be like, this is my brother who cannot speak the language because he is just a dumb worker. Yeah. But she was the smart one. She had it together until they get to Romania, where they meet someone who can speak English, this is based off the book.
And he's British.
Yeah, he's British.
Red flag.
He's like, oh, you're American, you can speak English. In the book, this character, Morgan, his wife is already dead, and the village people are like, she's a vampire, we're going to decapitate her. He's like, please don't let them desecrate her body. And Louis is like, I will help with that. This is not about desecrating her body. They upped those stakes. Yeah. But Louis and Claudia coming into this situation with all these white people and all their white drama and all their like folklore and their traditions, they kind of just like back away. They walk away.
Right choice. That's what I would have done.
This is not their fight.
This is what the old country TM. And I think in a lot of ways it's kind of illustrating that like to get further into understanding vampirism is going to get them more into the unknown, more into lanes that are not inherently safe for them and their pigment. And then I think also that's what makes Armand such a compelling choice partner for Louis in this incarnation, because like how many non-white vampires are we going to see who can understand the dual nature of being so powerful and yet so vulnerable because of something else? And so I think it'll be interesting to see how much of that is the allure of Armand to someone like Louis.
We did get to see a bit of Armand in Dubai so far. Like, Louis hasn't reached Armand yet in his journey in the story he's telling Daniel, but we do see Louis and Armand as a couple
right now
in Dubai as Louis is still telling Daniel his story. What did you think about their interracial relationship?
It's an interracial relationship between two people who are people of color. I think it's interesting because Armand is an older vampire, so he clearly still has a lot of like, he wants to dominate. You can see that in the way he talks about something. He wants to give
500 years old.
500 years old. You know, the age gaps are crazy. But 10 years, 10,000 years. That's how I go. No. But I feel like Armand wants Louis to feel comfortable, wants him to feel safe. He wants to be in control. So a lot of the relationship you see is him being like, okay, fine. It's like giving him rope. And you can tell that, like, he's still in control. He's in control the same way Lestat was in control. But Louis has tried to romanticize it more, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be interesting seeing how, like, he wants Armand to be different than Lestat.
Yes,
But they're
and
similar.
they've given a few interviews so far. They've given talks. You can like read all these interviews, these panels.
Sorry.
Where they're like, okay, we don't want to just repeat the Louis Lestat dynamic. So Louis and Armand have to be different. So we're going to approach it this different way, and we're going to like as actors, as directors, as scene. You know, it's going to be this very different thing. So what we learned in this first episode, which we watched tonight, was that Armand does not want this interview to happen.
Yeah.
But it's happening.
Yeah.
Armand spent last season pretending to be an assistant so that he could like be there in the room.
Yeah.
Without
Not real
really knowing.
Rashad. Yeah.
Yeah. Real Rashid, he's also there.
He's back. He's back. That was so funny. I love
it. And Real Rashid is great. He's like, I live to serve.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up.
Same. Like, I don't know how anything to do with
But
this.
like Armand's there and he's like, this is off the record. This is off the record. This is off the record.
Yeah.
Ha! Good luck.
Yeah. Danielle is like an actual reporter. He speaks truth to power.
Yes. But Armand being there with Louis saying, I still don't approve of this interview, but he's giving it anyway. He doesn't have the power to stop it.
Yeah.
He is the ancient vampire. Why doesn't he have the power to stop it?
Because I think that for Armand, he has the power to stop it, but you can't keep him that way. If Armand stops Louis from the interview, he becomes Lestat. And it's not a bad thing inherently. But they don't have
he
the same
doesn't want to go there.
He doesn't want to go there.
He's very concerned with crossing that line because he does not want Louis to think like Lestat was the bad. Lestat cheated on him with Antoinette. Armand would never cheat on him. Armand would never betray him in this way.
Armand would never be on Am I the Asshole on Reddit. Never.
Armand would never grab him by the jaw and drag him across the yard and drop him from a mile in the sky.
Never do that.
No, Armand is the good one.
And that's why he's doing this, even though he's not the good one. But being the good one is a skin he's wearing right now. Mm-hmm. It's been 70 years. Skin's fitting pretty well, but now it's a little tight. Because when you're on the same page, it's fine. They need therapy. They need better help / maybe the Eventide. Not a sponsor.
As readers of the book, we know what Armand is really like, right? Tell them about Armand.
Well, Armand is like, first of all, he's a redhead, so like the red flag number one.
He's not a ginger though. He's like dark redhead with the brown eyes.
It's urban. It's urban. What Anne Shirley wants me to do. Yes. Like it'll darken to a lovely urban. He's definitely more manipulative, and he uses his youth as a technique of entrapping people before he destroys them. Mm-hmm. So it's a long game for him, and I think putting myself in the position of Louis as a black person going throughout the world, so many of the people that Louis interacts with are white, and who he connects with are white. To have the opportunity to connect with someone who is brown like him, because like the actor who plays Armand is also like equally a dark skinned man.
No. You haven't seen this episode yet, but in a coming episode, Claudia is excited about the fact that the Paris Theater Coven is run by a person who has darker skin than Louis.
That's it. The fact that I could think of that as a thing before watching that episode, I think is so key, is that like, that's what you look for when you're out and you're traveling. And someone who's been, I've traveled to Europe, I've traveled to like the UK, Mexico. When you see brown skinned people around you, there's a sense of like, exhale.
Yeah, it's like my people. I'm safe.
It's like
I'm okay.
I'm not a token, And I think so for him to go and meet Armand, who's darker than them, and to see him be in charge, it's a sense of like he must know what it's like. And I think that you never account for anti-blackness because it's different from being dark-skinned. But I think that the interesting thing about Armand and Louis is like they're both not white. Armand is darker than Louis. But Armand is not black. Nope. And how should that play? And that's still going to be a factor, in my opinion. I don't know how it's going to be in the show for full. But
in season 1, was he was pretending to be Rashid. He was pretending to be Muslim.
Yeah.
We don't know if he is actually Muslim or if it was just an act of pretending to be Rashid.
Yeah. That'd be so cool if we had it. It'd be so interesting to see. Like, we never see Muslim vampires. seeing I think like the woman who walks at night.
Yeah, the girl who walks at night.
Yeah. That's probably the main one. But like we haven't seen a lot of that.
Okay, but my Muslim friends are concerned that by instead of Armand being Catholic and having this Catholic doctrine of I am the child of Satan and I will enact Satan's decree by killing people, which is the will of God, and therefore I'm a functional part of God. Now he is a Muslim. Killing people as a functional part of God. Is that problematic? Is that upsetting? Or is it representation? And my Muslim friends are very not like okay with this conversation right now. Like they don't have an answer.
I think we'll have to see. I think that like Catholicism and vampirism is an easy thing because it's so thing.
But like Anne Rice was Catholic. Like everything about Anne Rice's Catholicism undermines all the vampires. But I noticed a thing with like season 1, the people who wrote it were not Catholic. Yeah. They came from a very WASP perspective, which is a very
and that's different.
Interesting and different perspective, which made an interesting and different show. But it's different. So you come back to these like Catholic like traumas, and they're not there. So now we're making those Muslim traumas. What's that going to look like?
Well, I think it's interesting because, and I'm not Muslim, so I can't qualify this. But as someone who's written a character who is Muslim, and like a book I'm working on, it's like I know that a lot of Muslims feel like all creatures, all things are belong to Allah. So if you think that, then it's like even the demons are creatures of Allah. So
that's what the children of Satan think.
Exactly.
Whole, like,
so I think that it's not necessarily a split. I think that it might feel that way to people who aren't knowledgeable of that faith. But I think that if you understand that like it's the same principle, then it actually makes a lot of sense for him to think that like, you know, I am a child of Allah. No matter what I do, I'm doing it under His name. Is the same thing as like a Catholic who would think the exact same thing. I think that if anything, it's a conversation to discuss the way in which, like, you know, the Torah, the Quran, the Bible are all the book. You know, it's all narratives about the same kind of faith and the same, you know, God in a lot of ways and how it has been shown through different cultures throughout time. So I think it's an interesting way to have a conversation. So I think that if you were a vampire, I would love to see a vampire praying to Mecca, multiple times a day, because like, you know, let's see what happens. You know, like it's fine. And also like the iconography is not there, like a cross. We think of a crucifix,
right.
But how rare do we see like a Star of David being used as a vampire, or like, you know, or like a Quran? So it's gonna be interesting to talk about like how vampirism affects people who are not Catholic. That'd be so fun. I think.
So if the children of Satan become a Muslim cult of children of Satan, it could be very interesting. It could be very, very deep, but it also could be very problematic of this perpetuating this propaganda of, you know, Islamic faith equals monsters.
Yeah. And while I understand that, absolutely, and I'm not a Muslim, so I can't speak to this. It's unfortunate to tie everything to that mentality, because it's like, so what? They're going to do that anyway.
It's like calling Catholic people monsters. Someone's going to be upset no matter what.
And like children of Satan is one thing. And even like I was talking about this with somebody of like, as someone who went to Catholic school growing up, one of the biggest things that always made me kind of like interesting was like, you know, in the book of Job, you realize that like they have like all the angels have a meeting every fucking month apparently, and Satan's there being like, Job, I think he really loves you, but like, are you sure he loves you, or just because you do nice things for him? And God's like, let's figure that out. I feel like that's kind of thing that you could do with Armand. It's like he's a child of, because like Satan in different respects is not like a demon. He's the adversary of humanity. And if you use it as the adversary of humanity in any Abrahamic faith, it's not about you being evil. It's about you being the thing that tests humanity. And what tests humanity more than the vampire?
So the children of Satan believe that their like calling of why they exist is to be an evil to prove that God is good.
Yeah.
Like God cannot be proven good if evil does not exist, and that's why we exist. Yeah. But as Lestat comes in the books, he proves that that's bullshit. Yeah. That means nothing, that he walks into the church, nothing exists. How do you think that would translate to this new non-white Armand and whatever cult he may have led in the past? Like, Muslim or not, like maybe he was a Catholic person of what he was.
Yeah.
But like, where does race even come into that?
That's a really interesting question because like the Black church is such an interesting experience, which I have tentatively because I didn't grow up in the quote unquote Black church. But I think that like if you grow up in faith and you grow up believing that like for Louis specifically, if you grew up believing like the downtrodden and the harmed are the people who will be blessed, how does that reconcile with vampirism? You know what I mean? Like he may think that as like Armand, but I think for Louis, who is our entry point, if he grew up in the Catholic Church, how does he believe that his Catholicism can connect with the idea of torment as a thing of faith? And I think what will be interesting is seeing how he reconciles his tentative and very lax connection to humanity with vampirism. And it's tested through Lestat, but tested faith-wise is going to be his real test because, like, he can't worm his way out of it the same way, especially with people who are smarter and older than him. So I'm really, like, you just saying that makes me curious of seeing how it will really play out. But I think that it's, like, it's so open-ended because we don't really know what Armand will be faith-wise. We don't know.
Right, like, we barely saw him.
Exactly.
We got
but I think it's worth speculating because, like, you know, or even Armand being like he's Muslim in the thing, but like, you know, what if he was Hindi? You know, what if he was something else? Mm-hmm. There's so many layers to like what the possibilities are, and it just makes me realize that like we have just scratched the surface of vampire content, you know, of what vampirism looks like outside of Catholicism.
So in season 1, Louis was very much struggling with like, I was raised Catholic, I have guilt, I have baggage, I have trauma. Does it feel like in season 2, from the one episode you saw so far, that he's over that? Or
no,
like, where
you're
is
never
he
over it.
there at this point in what you saw?
Yeah. You know, as someone who's not Catholic but went to Catholic school, you never really get over your first Jesus lesson. But
so what did you see in this episode that showed us that?
I do think him talking to Claudia about letting things go is him trying at the core of him to try and let go of his own idea of his wickedness, of him trying to move past, like, we're in this together, and whatever we find will be with us. I think he's trying to find his own sort of, like, secular feeling of what matters is you and me.
So he's, like, moved beyond religion at this point, and he's now, like, I don't care about God, I don't care about fate, I don't care about, like...
Or I would even say, not even that he doesn't care, he's making his religion him and Claudia.
Yeah.
It's like, them together.
That's how the episode ends,
exactly,
right? He's like, you and me and you, which we saw in the trailers, right? Like, you all know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Like, you and me and you and me, we are family, we are us.
And that's what matters.
We have this bond, like, we have these connections with neither of us have had with anyone else. We didn't have it with Lestat because he was white, we didn't have it with our families because they didn't, like, accept us. This is it.
Yeah, this is us.
But she's not really there, is she?
I think that for Claudia, I think that, like, her as a, you know, femininity and vampirism is something that, like, we talk. How many vampire shows exist where the main issue for a female vampire is her reproductive desires? You know what I mean? And I feel like...
I don't think this Claudia wants to have babies, though.
No. I don't think that. But I think for her, instead of reproduction, it's sex.
Yeah. She definitely wants to get laid.
Relatable. And I think in a lot of ways, like, they're not prepared to handle that because they see her perpetually in girlhood and not as a woman in womanhood, whatever that might mean for her. And it's like, so we have it in a situation where we have Claudia, who is a woman in every way that counts. She's like mentally, but not
30-something by now. Yeah, still in this 14-year-old body.
As a millennial, she's like, I'm technically an adult, but I feel like a child, and I'm like, same.
I cannot afford a house. I cannot afford a marriage. I still have 6 roommates, and this is my life.
Truly, it's like, I don't even know how to have children. Me. But, like, get a cat, Claudia. But yeah, so I definitely feel like that.
They should never do it again.
That'd be so cute.
So we see them go to this tavern where they're pretending to be a father and daughter, and they pretend to be looking for the lost mother in their family. And they're in this situation where they're trying to figure out what's going on. These people seem afraid of vampires. Yeah. There's a thing going on. So at this point, they're like, oh, Claudia, run off and play with the children. And Louis says, Claudia, go play with the children because children gossip.
Yeah, and you'll hear some shit.
Yeah. But then she goes off with the children. She accepts it. She goes, and then she immediately kind of dismisses them and just goes off on her own out into the woods, where she gets hurt and she has to go back to Louis for help.
Yeah.
She can't do it on her own.
Yeah, and I think she's limited but doesn't want to be, which makes sense because she's like technically still like in her vampire adolescence, and she's acting out. And I think that because she sees Louis as inherently weak, we can buy his emotions for Lestat. We can buy his not wanting to eat human blood. You know, she sees him as like, you are not my equal.
Well, that's what she calls him in her diary in this episode. She calls him dead weight, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Dead weight.
Dead weight. And I feel like that's true for her because it's like, what good are you to me if you can't even be on my level?
She can't go on without it.
Yeah.
She needs him to be like the one to
adult.
Present the papers to the Nazis at the border. Right?
Exactly.
Yes.
She needs an adult, and he is her adult. For Louis, Claudia is his morality pet, his reason for living. But for Claudia...
Well, that's what he says at the end of episode 3 when he first finds her. He's like, my salvation.
Yeah.
My salvation.
So, like, that's putting so much pressure on her where she's
like this
you are not that for me,
person should not be any one person's salvation.
And if she was really... And if she mattered that much to him... he would have let her die or just let her live as a human.
That's what she says. That's what she says in episode 5. Like, I was still breathing. Yeah. Why didn't you take me to the hospital? I could have survived.
Yeah. It's a selfishness of like, you know, you think of it like a surrogacy almost. Which I'm not, you know, blanketing everyone, but like the idea of like surrogacy is like, I want my own child. And like for them as vampires, they wanted their own child. Like if they had had a human child, she would have died, but she would have gotten to live. And in this way, they get to keep her how they want her forever. And that means that resentment will breed. She has to accept that because there's no way she can change. That is the thing about Claudia that's the most interesting is like you're encased in amber as the most vulnerable part of yourself. Then what? You know, like the kind of men, like I think of also like, you know, I mentioned Fletcher, but also let the right one in.
Yes.
The only people who would be attracted to you are pedophiles and abusers.
That's what she says in episode 5. She's like, who would want me?
Yeah.
The uncle who watched me pee, pedophiles, like perverts, or little boys. Like, what are my options?
Yeah.
But we know from the trailers that she does find Madeleine, which from the interviews have been hinted that it's romantic. Yeah. So is Madeleine a pedophile? She's 30. Yeah. Is she a pedophile just like the uncle who watched her pee, or is it different because she's a wolf? Yeah. Like, well, I think that's interesting because there's a layer to it where I think people think that way, but like obviously as modern people, you know that's not true because women can be abusers. But also what if you know she's a vampire? It's like, but you know, for me, I'd be like, I'm sorry, girl, you have to be physically looking a little bit older than that for me. Like I couldn't be that Madeleine. But we'll see what she says. It couldn't work for me. Okay, as a queer person, the concept of Madeleine being attracted to Claudia, not because she's like a sexy 14-year-old, but because of her soul, right? Yeah. Like her personality. Is that a connection that women can have between each other that a man could never have had toward Claudia, which is why she's like the only men who could want me are perverts? Or is that not a good... You know, as much as I love to rag on men, and I do, I think that that's kind of bullshit. I say that because I feel like there are men out there who could have that like soul connection. It's like, that's what Fledgling, right? Yeah. In Fledgling, he's like, I feel this attraction to you, 10-year-old, like 50-year-old woman in a 10-year-old body. Yeah. It's not because you're 10, it's just the vampire thing going on between us. I am not a pedophile. I've never been attracted to a 10-year-old person before in my life, but you know, vampire magic, whatever. Yeah. But like, if Madeleine is into Claudia in a soulmate kind of way, would Claudia have previously perceiving men as not being capable of that? Maybe this is like a wake-up call for her. I think it'll be interesting to see how they develop Madeleine because she kind of just kind of like appears in the books in a certain way. And I think that in the show, from the trailers, we see a lot more of her than we've seen in the books. Yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see how that conversation happens because I feel like that's a big question to ask, and I think that like, is she French? Because the French are weird about that shit too.
No shade, but it's true.
I mean, she's mentioned the book.
I mean, look at Macron. So, like, you know, it could be, she's French, so they're very flexible on these things as well. So I can't do that. But
you know what they say about the French.
I mean, like, but, like, I do think that it's an interesting question to have of, like, what it might mean. Because I think that, like, in the movie, they play up the maternal element.
Madeleine's like a daughter who cannot die, right?
Yeah. So I think that it'll be interesting to see, like, what does the connection actually mean. Because I feel like in a lot of ways, the book has undertones, but the movie is very, like, non-sexual. It's very, like, I need a mom. I need a female element in my life. And so,
do you think the movie is sexual between her and Louis, or equally non-sexual as it is with Madeleine?
I think it's equally non-sexual. Personally.
Yeah, I thought that too. Like, I didn't think Claudia was sexual with Louis. A part of people are like, "Oh, Kirsten Dunst kissed Brad Pitt in that one." I'm just like, it was.
I think she thought it was gross.
Yeah, no, she did.
Considering who her husband is, she wasn't into that shit. You know, like she like Landry from Fallon, and like I think that will be interesting. And I think that, like, if you think of it from, like, an asexual perspective.
You know, Anne Ryan's vampires are asexual, but the TV show is very not asexual. No, so Claudia very much does have a sex drive.
Yeah.
She wanted to know what Charlie's tongue tasted like.
Yeah.
Like, she very much has that drive, and she could potentially have that for Madeleine. Like, we could very much see a FF relationships in this season.
Yeah. Which I think could be interesting. I think that, like, it'll be
we need that in more vampire shows. Right?
I agree.
Like,
I agree, because I think a lot of the FF relationship we had in vampire shows sucks ass, personally. I'm not a Tara Pam fan.
And Pam, yes, I was.
I never liked them, and I feel gaslit.
Like this.
To me, like, Pam loves Eric so much that Tara could never fit into their whole thing. And I'm like, let's just not even put you in this. I feel like for a modern day audience, Madeleine and Claudia can't work with sex. You know, and I don't mean the director. I think it's fine to critique it, but I think that it feels very asexual. And I want to know what happened.
A cop out of, like, oh, FF relationships, they're just gals being powers. They have the soul bond, but they're not actually, like, licking each other. I think like, is that a cop out here? Like,
I think it's a matter of how much the show wants us to view Claudia as a child. And how much effort did they make to show us seeing Madeleine like her as an adult. I think that'll make the difference, because I think that, like, we know Claudia's not a child. She's not a kid. It reminds me of, like, Poor Things. I just saw, like, in the movie Poor Things, Bella is not a child. She has a child's brain, but she isn't sexually active until she's kind of above that level, and she's an adult body. How much is Madeleine going to see Claudia as a child? How is she going to see her as an adult? And how much will that factor into their attraction? Because I feel like it's...
I saw the actor for Madeleine's hint at something, was like, you just have to wait and see, which is like what's going around the internet right now, where there's a ship tease going on, which is why I even asked these questions in the first place. But we didn't see Madeleine in this episode at all. We didn't see Claudia having anyone but Louis in this episode.
And again, it's so different because in the show, obviously she's much older than she would look, because, like, Claudia is very, very young. So I think it's a totally different dynamic. And I think that, like, it'll be the first time I'm really thinking about that in that way. Because, like, even in the movie, Kristen Dunst is so young looking and so non-sexual and so permanently child-minded that, like, you don't see the Madeleine Claudia relationship as sexual. So it'll be interesting to see how...
But, like, even if you did, that wouldn't be a bad thing. Like, it's not...
Yeah. It's nuanced. But I also wonder, like, I think the issue with Fledgling is, like, what is the point of said nuance if we are to introduce it, you know, that has not already been discussed? And we've seen Claudia want to engage with other teenagers, so it's like, what is it going to be? It'll be an interesting journey, and I think, like, if vampirism is meant to explore anything, it's to explore the nuances of sexuality.
What did you think about Claudia's, like, violence in this first episode compared to, like, Louis' violence? You know, he was kind of the reticent one, and she ripped a heart out of a person's chest and, like, threw it at Louis.
She was hungry.
Smacked into the screen. Lou grabbed it and like chomps into the heart.
She was hungry. You know, I love that about it. I love that Claudia is violent. I actually really love that Louis is so soft boy that he's just like, I don't and Claudia's like, fucking eat people. I love that for her. She's the best. She's my favorite. I think, like, Claudia's my favorite character in the book, And she has become my favorite character in this show, but for a totally different reason.
No, she's a totally different character.
Yeah.
Like, we met Delaney tonight.
Yeah.
We got to see her.
Yeah,
Tell me about your experience seeing Delaney.
It was so surreal because seeing someone who you thought of as like in one way and then seeing them like, and they're so beautiful, obviously, and talented.
I tweeted a picture of her like outside meeting her fans.
There was a moment where like we were in this like this interactive thing where like she saw Jacob, who plays Louis, and he like calls her over and they're like talking. And I'm like, oh, they're like so close. It was just so cute, and I think that they really have a great camaraderie, and so I'm very invested in their relationship. And like, spoiler alert, as book readers, you know, Claudia dies. She's like the Gwen Stacy of like the interviewed member.
Yeah,
she stays dead.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be so
But she's
tragic.
A ghost in future books. So
yeah,
maybe Delaney will come back.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get to see more.
So I don't think it's about me. But
yes.
So like, fun fact, the first vampire book I read that had Louis and Claudia was Merrick. Because I had read, because I'm married for Witches, so I had read Merrick.
Okay,
and that's when they bring back the ghost.
You started with the witching hour.
Literally, and I read like those.
Okay.
And then like that's the one where they're like, oh, I know and like Louis comes in and they're like, oh, let me bring back Ghost Claudia. And so I'm like, what? So like that's how I know them. So I'm like, I know she'll be back as a ghost.
No, the whole contrivance in the show of Claudia's diary telling part of the show comes straight from that book.
Yeah.
And from Queen of the Damned, like her little diary entries, which aren't in the original novel at all. Like in Interview with the Vampire, she's not a diary keeper, but they brought that in from later on in the series.
And I think it works so well because I think that like it's good to have. I think also the thing of memory. Of Louis mentioning that his memory doesn't remember everything right away.
So in this episode, he like the very first line in it is, Claudia told me she never dreamed.
Yeah.
And then throughout the episode, he realizes that's not true.
Yeah,
she wrote that into her diary, and I remember her saying that, and this was my like conviction of her as a person for these past many years.
Yeah.
And
it's not entirely true.
It's not true. And he's like thanking Daniel, thank you for unearthing these memories for me, for making me realize like I've been reading her diaries compulsively all these years because he's a creep like that.
And who is in common with this because of that is of course Armand. Because what does that mean?
But then he realizes this thing he's like made part of his narrative is wrong.
Yeah.
So what I hope is that, you know, the theme of this season is memory is a monster.
Yeah.
So we got this little bit in episode 1, that his memory of whether Claudia dreams or not is wrong. And then we had a moment in the tavern where he thought, she comes up and she says, oh, there's danger out there. And he's like, no, wait, she wouldn't have said that in front of Claudia because she's a child. No, she said that later.
Yeah.
So he's correcting his narrative as he goes along. He's like, we have to get it exactly right.
And I think that's going to lead to disconnect with him and Armand. Because Armand clearly is not happy with this.
No,
and that's why he does like the interview, because it allows him to reflect on these things.
No, he doesn't want Louis remembering these things. He wants Louis to remember it the way he's had him remember it for all these years. So I'm expecting in episode 2, episode 3, all the way up to episode 8, that every single episode, Louis is going to remember something different. A little bit different. Yeah, that is, I think it will build up, and then eventually when we get to maybe, I know episode 7 is when the whole trial of Claudia's death happens. So I don't know what episode 8 is. You got a whole nother hour of television after that.
Sure,
It's going to be something. But it's going to be some big memory reveal thing that Armand is... You know, I don't think, like, there's this big fan theory going around that Armand, like, wiped Louis' memories and given false... I don't think that's true. I think it's just more of Armand being like, here's the diary entries you can read, and here's the ones that you can't read.
I think Armand is probably going to pretend that he was less complicit in Claudia's death than he probably was. Mm-hmm. And I think that Louis remembering how detailed it was through telekinetics is going to be the thing that's going to change everything.
In the book, the way it goes is that Armand wants Louis to separate from Claudia, and it's not happening. He tries several things to make that happen. It's not happening, and it ultimately leads to him having Claudia put on trial for murdering Lestat, because in the book, she's the one who murders him, not Louis, unlike the show. And she gets executed for that. And now Louis is free of Claudia, and he can be Armand's. But then Louis knows this happened. He knows Armand's behind it. And so he's emotionally shut down from Armand. So Armand shot himself in the foot, and he ends up with this like shell of a Louis. And they stay together, but he's got a shell of a Louis. Yeah. And it's a very tragic ending. But in this version...
Yeah.
If he's
it
like,
clicked.
hiding how much he was complicit, if Louis doesn't realize that Armand was the mastermind behind it all.
Yeah. And I think that I say beautiful, but I believe in that. It kind of highlights something that I love about vampire stories is that, like, when it comes to love and you're a vampire, how much does the truth really matter? Also, at this point, Louis has chosen 2 vampire boyfriends who are toxic. Maybe it's you.
That's what the trailer's like. You chose another one over me. But it's like, okay, imagine you are an adult who has romantic feelings.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Would you choose your child over romantic fulfillment? And like that is a hard choice. Like, how do you, like, ideally you could have it both, right? Like,
yeah. Well, you know what I think is interesting is, like, I don't know, because we know that Anne Rice wrote Claudia in response to her own grief of losing her child.
But she didn't even realize that
when
she was writing. It was entirely subconscious.
Yeah. And I wonder, my instinct is that I would choose my child. At the same time, her partner was dead. Would she have chosen that partner? And to build more opportunities with him that's different from your child. We talk about Claudia as a reflection of her grief. But Lestat is also a reflection of that same grief. And I think it's a thing of, like, you know. So, you know, I love Superman. And one of the things that I love about the animated series is that, like, in the cartoon, Superman's mother, Kryptonian mother, could have left with him as well. And she stays to die with her husband. And when I was young, I didn't understand it. I was like, why wouldn't you go to be with your kid? As an adult, I'm like, you know, your child matters to you, but also, like, your partner also matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a hard choice.
It's a hard choice.
Do I give up my chance of love in life?
And if you also believe that your child will be better and live a full life elsewhere, are you going to also be like, no, I'm going to get rid of my love as well? And I think that, like, what we're seeing with Louis is his idea of, like, can I be a parent and find love at the same time?
Yeah.
Can I be a single mom who works 2 jobs, who loves her kids and never stops? A gentle hair with the heart of a fighter. I'm a survivor.
So we didn't get to see Louis meet Armand in this episode, but we did see them in present day, where they're like very much a couple, and Daniel's very much like making fun of them.
Yeah.
And
he's such a hater. I love him.
He is.
He's like, oh, off the record, scratch that. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, every time Armand talks, he's like,
anyway.
So, like, Vampire Chronicles, Made for Witches is all very white.
Yeah.
Except for Merrick, right? But when you found out they were making it black, how did that feel? Like, what was that?
I was super suspicious. Like, I think that the thing for me is that race bending has been a double-edged sword. I'm glad that actors are getting paid, but I feel like there's a lack of consciousness made to blackness when that change happens. I think the best example in cultures is, like, The Little Mermaid that just came out recently.
I love that movie.
Which I do enjoy for the most part. Like, I mean, like, Halle Bailey's amazing in it. Like, there's nothing you can say about her. She's sung to the princess.
She is a Disney princess.
She can sing.
Like,
literally nothing is wrong with her. But, like, it's done to create more representation. Mm-hmm. They know that it'll bring a new audience. But, like, you think about how much care will be done to protect the actors. She's gone through a lot of stuff for a lot of different reasons. But I think that, like, for me as a black person, it's both the actors but also the fandom itself. And then
the Little Mermaid fandom.
Well, it was more like people, like, did you see, like, there was a thing where, like, people were doing, like, racist images of, like, putting Newports in pictures of, like, the Halle Bailey promos? It was really gross. Oh, no. And you think about it, like, why is that happening? And, like, I saw it in theaters, and there were, like, a bunch of white kids just, like, having
like,
fun.
Little Mermaid is a Danish story. Like,
and it's like, but dude, but she's not Danish in the fucking in a Disney movie.
No,
like,
it's the Caribbean. Like, Sebastian's, like, clearly
like a Jamaican crab.
Yes,
and it's really weird. Anyway, I love him, but, like, Daddy, I love him. But, like, I think that, like, with Interview with the Vampire, I was nervous about, like, the change because, like, Louis is a slaveholder. It's a very
you wrote a whole great, like, article about this, right? Like,
I did a video about Confederate vampires, and it's like, you know, like, Louis being a slave owner is important. I also think very important to the way that, like, Anne Rice crafts race from a white perspective in her books as well. Mm-hmm. So, like, to change that is to change, I think, the core of the series. And I think so far it's worked well because, like, they are modernizing it. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't work in the same time period that, like, it took place in the books, obviously, because it's so much antebellum. And I think that, like, I get because that first episode did so many interesting things with Louis and his blackness and his race and like the French white line. I was talking to the actress who played
Grace.
Who plays the sister. And I was like, my friends and I put that all the time.
He was like, tell me about this French white.
What kind of white is he? Is that different kind? It's so funny. And like, it just works really well. I think that the show managed to make Louis feel like a mixed race black guy who has a chip on his shoulder, has privilege, but also has to deal with being marginalized as well. Like, at the point where all your privileges and your margin are like at a head, and your French white vampire boyfriend shows up.
Do you think Louis' dead father was mixed or was he white?
Mixed, for sure.
I thought so.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely light skinned.
Yeah.
He looked like Drake.
But he didn't have a white dad, right?
No, I don't think he had a white dad.
Because then, we're getting to daddy issues with Lestat.
If he had a white dad, he's really fucked. He's lost. But I think he had a mixed race life.
I mean, he's lost no matter what.
His dad had green eyes at most. That's what I think.
Yes. So, I have seen the screeners. I know what's coming up in episodes 1 through 6, but you have not.
No, I'm not.
What are you most looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to seeing Armand and Louis' relationship develop.
In modern day or in the past?
In the past. I want to see how he scored that twink. And I'm also looking forward to, I'm really looking forward to seeing Claudia's downfall. I think that she's such an independent character, and I wonder, like, because she stays with Louis out of safety, out of obligation, but also I think to a degree out of love. I want to see how her love.
I mean, that love is there. Like, there's so much, like, pain in that love, but the love between all three of them is
so strong.
There, it really is.
I want to see at the point where she stops being Lestat's daughter and being Louis' daughter, and how that leads to her being in her downfall. Because I feel like her when she loves Madeleine, that's when she becomes Louis' daughter, and it's gonna be the downfall. I am so happy that you invited me to the premiere. I can tell you guys this. I have loved this lady forever. Maven the Eventide was my favorite thing to watch on Channel Awesome. I was also Vampire Girly. I watched so many movies because of you. And now that we're friends and we get to hang out and we get to laugh about this stuff, is so surreal to like 32-year-old me.
No, I'm like, I have a friend who actually likes Anne Rice. Who actually has read the books. Who actually cares.
I remember I was reading The Mayfair Witches in my school during my downtime. This giant mass market paperback, this fucking thing.
No, it's a brick. It's a door stopper.
It's a fucking brick stopper. And I was just like, someone can talk to me about it. I adore you. And like, this show has been so interesting to watch because it's such a layered adaptation. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, as someone who enjoys the 90s movie, it's so rich, and who doesn't like the Mayfair Witches, that this show has been such a wonderful way of showing what an interesting adaptation can be like. There are definitely issues, there are definitely things that like don't always click perfectly, but I think that it's ambitious in a way that I respect more than a lot of other like no adaptations. Like, so I'm just glad that we get to talk about this, to hang with my friend, get to be vampire loves together, and I adore you, so thank you for having me here to talk about this with you. I can't think of anyone else I want to talk about vampires than this person right here. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been the Maven of the Eventide.
This has been Princess Weeks.
And we are signing off.
I love you so much.
I love you too. Now we're actually vampires now.
Yes, because we have a seduction.
Exactly. Mm. It's like we saw your look from across the room. We saw. You want to come up?
We're here. We're waiting. We are here.
We're here, chilling. The Lestat to my Louis. And then Louis to my Lestat. She's problematic. No, it's right here.